Greetings all, I'm Aaron Mills, and welcome back to Legacy of the Pink Panther, a 12-part retrospective on the films and cartoons of the Pink Panther franchise. Last time, we talked about Peter Sellers and Blake Edwards' return to the franchise and how that resulted in the highest-grossing installment in the series. However, Sellers and Edwards' return almost went in a completely different direction. Originally, with his name in Hollywood being Mud just before making the return of the Pink Panther, Blake Edwards collaborated with Inspector Clouseau writer Frank Waldman to develop a Pink Panther TV series. When Lou Grade gave Edwards the opportunity to make another Pink Panther film, Edwards and Waldman converted one of their two finished scripts into The Return of the Pink Panther. With that movie's massive success, United Artists wanted back in business with Edwards and insisted on rushing out another sequel. Edwards and Waldman then took their remaining TV script and reworked it into a feature film, and as a result, this is the only movie in the series starring Peter Sellers which directly follows on from the previous film. Which makes it kind of ironic, really, since, as mentioned, The Return of the Pink Panther is the only film in the series which MGM does not currently own, and as such, it's almost always left out of official film collections, thus snarling what little internal continuity the franchise has. Production was, unfortunately, rife with problems. The most notable was the continuing deterioration of the relationship Edwards had with Peter Sellers. Sellers, his health also deteriorating, had by this point developed a reputation for being almost impossible to work with, being excessively demanding and outright paranoid that his fellow actors and crew were out to ruin his reputation. When the movie came out in 1976, Sellers hated it and accused Edwards of misusing his talents. This, however, would not stop them from working together on one more Pink Panther film before Sellers' death in 1980. But we'll talk about that in a future episode. Instead, let's focus on this film, which started the tradition of having the phrase the Pink Panther in the title of every film going forward, despite the fact that the Pink Panther diamond itself would not be seen again until 1982. This is The Pink Panther Strikes Again. The film opens at the psychiatric hospital where former Chief Inspector Dreyfus was committed at the end of the last movie. We then go to Dreyfus's psychiatrist's office, where we see that things seem to be on the rise for the former Chief Inspector.
I was a sick man, wasn't I? We've come a long way, haven't we?
And you're not even a little bit bothered when you think of Clouseau?
Not even a little bit. Do you believe me?
If you say so.
Well, I could be lying. You are a good psychiatrist, but I may be a better liar.
For your sake, I hope you're not. Sooner or later, you'd run into Clouseau and then back here for life. No more chance of another hearing.
Coming here day after day, watching you chain-smoke yourself into an early grave, and knowing that on certain mornings you'll be particularly morose and testy because you've had another fight with your wife, like this morning.
How do you know that?
It's the only time you doodle.
Yes, remember kids, as previously established, Dreyfus is many things. Cursed by bad luck, high-strung, and prone to snapping like a twig, but one thing he is not is an idiot. In fact, I really like Herbert Lom's performance here because you get to see what Dreyfus was like before Clouseau came into the picture. He's intelligent, witty, and quite charming. Shame it's not going to last. After being told that the Sanity Commission will be meeting that afternoon and that he stands a good chance of being released, Dreyfus goes off to kill time. And because the universe loves a cruel joke, Clouseau arrives for a visit.
Well, I received a report from the Sanity Commission that they were going to review your case today, so I thought a few words from me on your behalf.
Oh, God. I mean, how generous of you, but...
Well, I'm not without influence, you know.
Dreyfus tries valiantly to keep it together through Clouseau's visit, and seemingly succeeds. Or does he?
I'm afraid that this is just not your day, my friend.
But it is my day. It is, my friend. After 3 long, terrible years, it is at last my day. I will not permit, repeat, not permit anything, repeat anything to spoil it. Now, I will walk you to the gate, and I will kiss you goodbye, and you will drive off in your new car, which should rightfully be mine. And then I will have my interview with the Sanity Commission, and they will set me free. And then I will kill you.
Well, so much for freedom. At least, through official means. When we come back from the obligatory opening titles, we see Clouseau arriving at home with his groceries, but it seems Dreyfus has escaped from the hospital and is lying in wait for him. This leads to a sequence where, during the also obligatory ambush by Cato, Dreyfus keeps moving around the apartment below trying to keep an eye on Clouseau, usually resulting in him being inadvertently thwarted thanks to Clouseau and Cato destroying their own apartment. Eventually, the fight ends, as it usually does, with a phone call. Clouseau is informed that Dreyfus has escaped the hospital and that he should take precautions. Clouseau, of course, interprets this as an opportunity to try out his new disguise, which for some reason is a Quasimodo outfit, complete with a helium inflatable hump. Dreyfus distracts Clouseau on the phone while he sets up a wad of C4 designed to blow Clouseau to hell. However, in typical Clouseau fashion, Clouseau leaves the helium running to the hump, which overinflates and floats him out of the apartment right as the bomb goes off, saving his life. Later in his office, as he waits for some dry clothes, Clouseau signs a prisoner transfer order for one Jean Tonnier, one of France's most notorious bank robbers. But during the transfer by train, it would appear that someone has other plans for Tonnier. Oh yes, Dreyfus has gone bad.
Now, this is my plan. Step number 1, I will recruit the world's greatest criminal mind. Step number 2, I will build an organization so sinister, so powerful, by comparison, the Cosa Nostra will seem like the Vienna Boys Choir. Here is the list.
But half of these men are in prison.
We'll get them out.
Impossible.
I'll bet you 20 million francs it is.
Why would I get 20 million francs?
I thought you'd ask that. Step number 3. Next Thursday at precisely 2 p.m., you and 6 men will enter the main branch of the Paris Credit Bank.
This afternoon at approximately 5 minutes to 5 o'clock, 3 men dressed in building maintenance uniforms entered and robbed the Paris Credit Bank.
Okay, so Dreyfus has not only gone bad, he's gone full-on supervillain. And it's only going to get crazier from here. The next step in Dreyfus's plan requires him to kidnap a noted British scientist, Professor Fassbender, and his daughter. When Jarvis, the butler, arrives from an unknown errand, he is knocked out. Scotland Yard is informed that Clouseau will be arriving to assist in the investigation, and he's taken to the house where he questions the staff.
What was your name?
Chalk.
The cook.
Gardener.
Ah! Now we are getting somewhere. You!
Here's one of the things I love about Clouseau. No matter how ridiculous or preposterous the situation, Clouseau always plays everything off like that's what he always intended to do. Clouseau is well aware of his own shortcomings as an inspector, but his own ego refuses to let him acknowledge that he's pretty much gotten this far through sheer dumb luck. This gives Clouseau kind of a quiet dignity and self-awareness, while still allowing him to have his moments of complete and utter ineptitude. And this movie shows it off brilliantly.
What has happened to Professor Fassbender and his daughter is another matter. And it is my job to bring the guilty party or parties to the justice. Now then, what do we know? 1, that Professor Fassbender and his daughter have been kidnapped. 2, that someone has kidnapped them. 3, that my hand is on fire.
Later, Clouseau stakes out the Fassbender residence and follows Jarvis when the butler leaves the house for an unknown reason late at night. Clouseau follows Jarvis to a nightclub in the nearby village, which turns out to be a meeting place for gay men and women. Now, I do need to pause here for a moment and issue a disclaimer. Please keep in mind that this movie was made back in 1976, and as such, the transgender movement as we know it today really didn't exist. I mean, gay rights was just barely getting into full swing at this time. As such, as I talk about this sequence, I may end up using terminology which could be considered insensitive by members of the transgender community. Please know that it is not my intention to offend. It's just me using the only thing I can think of as the most appropriate descriptor because this movie doesn't really talk about gender identity all much as far as Jarvis and the patrons of the bar are concerned, aside from the fact that, quite obviously, the patrons of this nightclub are comprised primarily of gay men and women. So, there's the disclaimer. I'm not trying to offend anybody. Let's move on. As it turns out, Jarvis is a performer at the club as, again, because I have no other frame of reference, a female impersonator. This naturally throws Clouseau for a loop.
Why is it that this afternoon you are Jarvis the Fassbender butler, and tonight you are...
Inspector, before you get yourself all unglued...
Madame or monsieur, I must warn you. You had better watch your step.
Oh dear God, the parrot from the last movie's out for revenge. Everybody hide! Jarvis pulls Clouseau into a tango right as two of Dreyfus's goons show up. Jarvis recognizes them as the kidnappers and points them out to Clouseau. The kidnappers attempt to abduct Jarvis, but Jarvis isn't going without a fight and starts a brawl, which results in the police raiding the place and Clouseau being arrested in the sweep. Meanwhile, at his secret headquarters, Dreyfus is attempting to convince the professor to assist him in the next phase of his diabolical plan.
You and I are going to join forces, Professor. We're going to build the doomsday machine and conquer the world. Have a suite.
Okay, so Dreyfus has moved past regular supervillainy and has become an out-and-out Bond villain. And, honestly, this is the point where the movie becomes the greatest Bond parody ever made. And yes, that actually includes the legitimate Bond parody that David Niven and Peter Sellers did in 1967 with the original Casino Royale. Fassbender naturally refuses to help the clearly unhinged Dreyfus, which causes Dreyfus to haul his daughter off to be subjected to one of the most diabolical tortures ever devised by man.
What are you going to do?
Something so very, very painful, so hideous, your father will have no choice but to cooperate.
No.
For God's sake, would you just tell him already?
All right, I'll tell you anything.
The next day, Dreyfus commits his most heinous act yet, interrupting a network television football game. Oh, yeah, and the President of the United States happens to be watching at the time.
That's why I say again, give me Clouseau, and we can all sleep secure in our beds.
What's a Clouseau?
And so, next week, I shall give the world a demonstration of the awesome power I hold. On Saturday, October 9th, at precisely 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the United Nations building will vanish from the face of the earth.
Following the broadcast, the lead investigators in the Fassbender kidnapping realize that Dreyfus's threats sound suspiciously similar to a secret government project. Meanwhile, Clouseau returns to the nightclub to question Jarvis further, only to find the kidnappers have gotten to him first. As it turns out, Jarvis was able to break the kidnapper's neck before he died, and Clouseau found a brochure on the kidnapper's body advertising the Oktoberfest celebration in Munich in 2 days. Scotland Yard offers to help, but Clouseau turns them down.
Well, I am off to Munich. Most ingenious. The old closet flyer. I really must congratulate you. If there's one thing I do enjoy, it's a good closet plier. Well, until we meet again, and the case is solved.
The case is solved.
Meanwhile, Dreyfus makes good on his threat. Dreyfus tells the world that he's giving them 7 days to kill Clouseau or he will wipe out an entire city. This doesn't quite sit well with his henchmen who don't believe Clouseau is that much of a threat. However, as Clouseau heads out to the Oktoberfest celebrations, we find that he has a beginning amount of 12 assassins out to kill him. What follows is a lengthy but hilarious sequence involving all these assassins attempting to kill Clouseau, but accidentally getting in each other's way and bumping each other off instead, while Clouseau naturally survives unscathed. This is a concept from the Highland Festival in Inspector Clouseau that I mentioned that Frank Waldman would revisit here in this movie. Under Blake Edwards' direction, however, this concept becomes a lot more fun, a lot more dynamic, and a joy to watch. Now, for the sake of time, I'm actually going to skip over most of it here, and honestly, you should really see this sequence in the context of the greater movie. Eventually, after 26 separate attempts to kill Clouseau, there are only 2 assassins left, the one from Russia and the one from Egypt. Additionally, Tonnier ignores Dreyfus's orders and heads out to take out Clouseau himself, even going so far as to disguise himself as Clouseau. Yeah, I got nothing. The Egyptian, played by Omar Sharif in a silent and uncredited cameo, breaks into Clouseau's room to ambush him. Meanwhile, Tonnier, disguised as Clouseau, gets his room key from the front desk and heads up, presumably to set his own ambush. As he rides up the elevator, the floor it stops on is observed by a woman in a fur coat who then heads up in the next elevator. Tonnier arrives in the room and is promptly killed by the Egyptian. However, before the Egyptian can leave, the woman in the fur coat, who is in fact the Russian assassin, gets into the room and gets his attention. The Russian attempts to seduce the Egyptian, believing him in the dark to be Clouseau. Just in case you forgot that these movies are screwball bedroom comedies and all. Clouseau returns to his room right as the Egyptian makes his exit, and after a bit more shtick, where, due to their movements around the room, Clouseau still remains oblivious of the Russian being there, Clouseau eventually gets into bed with her and, flustered, retreats to the bathroom to regroup, where he discovers Tonnier's body. And now, good news and bad news summed up in one sentence.
Hello, this is Chief Inspector Clouseau. There is a beautiful woman in my bed and a dead man in my bath.
Clouseau and the Russian examine the body, ascertaining his identity. The Russian also reveals that she was sent to kill Clouseau, and she was considered the best assassin for the job since no man had ever been able to involve her emotionally until that night. Which means, as I'm sure many women in the 70s could attest, Omar Sharif got serious game. In any event, as the Russian tries to get Clouseau back into bed, Clouseau spots the tattoo on the back of Tonnier's hand.
That tattoo. When I arrested Tonnier, he did not have that tattoo.
It looks like the Moonshine crest.
Moonshine?
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
An infamous family who ruled Bavaria in the 15th century. I read somewhere that the Moonshine Castle had recently been sold.
You read somewhere that they had sold the castle? Oh. Fancy them selling the castle just like that. The castle. Yes. Dreyfus.
Dreyfus.
He is in the castle. Nerve. Farewell. I am off to Moonshine Castle.
And so it's off to Bavaria and Moonshine Castle. Meanwhile, Dreyfus is getting a toothache, and Professor Fassbender is getting annoyed with being a hostage.
You cannot operate the machine without me.
Not yet, but when you have taught me.
And if I refuse to teach you?
And regrettably, I would have to take the matter up with your charming daughter.
What kind of a man are you?
A madman. You said so yourself.
Boss! Boss!
It's true.
When?
Early this morning, in his hotel room.
Ah! He's dead! Ah! He's dead in his hotel bedroom! Hooray! I'm free! Oh, I am so happy, Professor! Ah!
Clouseau arrives in Bavaria and after a series of unsuccessful attempts to get into the castle, gets an opportunity when Dreyfus calls for a dentist. The fun begins when Clouseau starts the nitrous oxide.
I don't know what you gave me, Doctor, but it's giving me hallucinations. Your whole face has changed.
How's this?
Grotesque! He has pulled the wrong tooth. There's only one man who would pull the wrong tooth. It's Clouseau.
this scene. Despite Peter Sellers' noted ability to be difficult to work with, this scene just encapsulates the chemistry that he and Herbert Lom have in these movies. Now, up to this point in the series, they've only been in a handful of scenes together, but this whole movie gives them a chance to really stretch their wings and bring the Clouseau and Dreyfus dynamic to its fullest and most hilarious point. It's wonderful. Clouseau makes his escape, disguising himself in a suit of armor, and Dreyfus decides to penalize the world for failing to kill him by firing the Doomsday Machine and wiping England off the face of the earth. Clouseau attempts to swing into the control room to stop the machine, but overshoots and ends up in the farmyard below. Climbing out, he takes a seat on what he thinks is a bench, but is actually a catapult, which goes off and hurls him back into the control room, right onto the Doomsday Machine.
You brought it on yourself. It's too late. Away. Do something. Don't come back. Help me. Look. Come help me. Help me.
Everyone evacuates the castle as the machine overloads and begins wiping the castle itself from existence, leaving Dreyfus inside to play out his final moments. And so Clouseau returns home, fully expecting another ambush by Cato, but gets quite a different ambush instead.
I gave Cato the night off.
But what has happened to my ring?
But it doesn't last.
Darling. A beautiful darling. What? What? Cato! You imbecile, not now, Cato!
And on that slightly less than romantic note, we come to the end of The Pink Panther Strikes Again. It's very much more over the top than most of the films we've seen so far, to the point of being almost cartoonish, but it's still pretty damn funny. Peter Sellers brings his A-game to the material despite his problems with working with Blake Edwards, and Herbert Lom gets to take things to the next level, playing up Dreyfus's hatred of Clouseau to the point of Bond villain level insanity. And while the Doomsday Device plot does seem to come out of left field, everyone in the movie sells it as the extremely silly Bond parody the movie unquestionably is. It's not as subtle as previous films in the series, but it doesn't need to be. It's just plain fun. Panther Strikes Again took in $33 million at the box office against a $6 million budget, making it yet another unqualified hit in the series. And if you're curious, that comes out to about $141 million today. Not as much as Return of the Pink Panther, but definitely nothing to sneeze at either. However, things were soon to come to an end, because the next film in the series would be the last one that Peter Sellers would ever work on. And not only that, it would present one of the largest continuity snarls ever seen in any film series ever. But we'll get into the details of that next time as we experience the revenge of the Pink Panther. I'm Aaron Mills. Join me again next time as we continue our look at the legacy of the Pink Panther.